Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on epistemological and intellectual development theories. In this video, we will discuss epistemological and intellectual development theories, specifically Perry, Bielanki, et al., and King and Kitchener's theories of cognitive development. We will take a deeper look into each theory, compare similarities, differences, and how each theory builds on one another. Perry, Bielanki, et al., and King and Kitchener's work and research created a foundation which has led to a better understanding of cognitive and intellectual development of college students. Their work has led to the creation of more theories and development models that are used and applied in higher education today. Let's start with a definition of epistemology. It is the study or theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. You will want to keep this definition in mind when considering the pros and cons of the three theories we cover in this video. What makes them valid and what limits each theory may have in regards to how college students develop. Cognitive structural theories are derived from the work of Paget. He was the first to recognize and hypothesize that children's brains aren't simply smaller versions of adult brains, but that children's minds work in a completely different and unique way. He believed this was important in understanding how children learn and how we build this into adulthood. This led to his stage theory, which breaks down the development process into 4 stages based on age. Depending on the stage a person is in, this frames the way they take in information and learn. Other research has built onto this work and used this framework to understand how students make meaning of their experiences in college. The way students make meaning of their experiences shapes the way they develop intellectually. Specifically, the work of Perry, Bielanki et al. And King and Kitchener's formed the basis of how we currently understand and view the development of college students. Our first theory we'll discuss is Perry's theory of intellectual and ethical development. Perry's theory was developed in the late 1950s and the early 1960s by William G. Perry Jr. along with his associates. Little work had been conducted on adolescent to adulthood transition, and they wanted to examine how students interpreted and made meaning of teaching and learning process. In Perry's theory, there are 9 positions and 4 stages. These 4 stages are dualism, multiplicity, relativism, and commitments in relativism. Dualism represents a mode of meaning-making. Individuals view the world dichotomously. This means that right answers exist for everything. Multiplicity is when students have cognitive dissonance and they start to learn and think more independently. Relativism happens when opinions no longer seem equally valid and individuals view some opinions that are little value. The basis is that all problems must have a reason. Commitments in relativism involves making choices in a contextual world and can be viewed as initiating ethical development rather than a cognitive development. Now that we have addressed the 4 stages, we will discuss the 9 positions within the 4 stages. The position of basic duality and full dualism represent a student moving from black and white areas to gray areas. The early multiplicity position is when students see 2 different problems, ones that can be solved and those that cannot. The late multiplicity position is when most problems don't have a solution. The next position is contextual, where solutions are supported by reasons, and pre-commitment is when students start to see a problem and commit to a solution. The commitment position is where students decide who they are and where they will be. Challenges to commitment is the position when a student is finding out how to commit to what they are deciding on and who they are. Post-commitment is when the student now understands what they believe in, even if others think differently. Perry's scheme was developed into a manual and independent judges conducted ratings. The time and cost limited it to being used widespread, so a paper and pencil theme was implemented. In 1974 and 1975, other instruments were developed, including Measure of Intellectual Development, or MID, Measure of Epistemological Reflection, Irwin's scale of intellectual development, and Moore's learning environment preferences measure. Examples of ways instruments have been used is the MID was used to assess influence of cognitive development of a program to enhance the professional identity of medical students, and the SID was used to assess the effectiveness as a semester-long career planning course for vocationally undecided students. The developmental instruction model was produced by Neff, Clamp, and Wittick as a resource to aid Perry's model. 4 variables are described in the model. The first variable is structure. Structure refers to framework and direction provided to students. Early in Perry's model, students value structure, and as they move through the positions, they began to see structure as debilitating. The next variable is diversity. Diversity has to do with presenting and encouraging students to consider alternatives and perspectives. Diversity is introduced in different ways and shows up later in Perry's model. Experiential learning relates to the concreteness, directness, and involvement to vicarious learning. Students are in need of this type of learning throughout, but it is most needed in the early stages. The last variable is personalism, which reflects the creation of a safe environment in which educators encourage risk-taking. Once again, this is most important for students in the early stages of Perry's scheme. Perry's theory is a model that we use in higher education quite often. We need to take this into account when working with students in their early years and throughout college, whether they are an undergraduate or graduate student. We are now going to move on and discuss our next theory, which is women's ways of knowing. The women's ways of knowing was originally developed by 4 different researchers: Mary Field Belenky, Blythe McVicker Clinchy, Nancy Rule Goldberger, and Jill Matuk-Tarul in the late 1970s. These 4 women studied 135 women, most of whom were either students or recent graduates. However, they also included some women that were affiliated with human service agencies that provided different types of support to female parents. These researchers wanted to understand a woman's way of thinking. What they ended up realizing was that women lacked confidence in their own ability to think, speaking often about holes in their learning. They ended up publishing their findings in their book, Women's Ways of Knowing: The Development of Self, Voice, and Mind, in 1986. The study and book are said to have contributed greatly to freeing women's voices. However, before we get too far in discussing this theory and its application, there are a few things that Belenky et al. Wanted to make clear about their research and findings. First, they referred to the different ways of knowing as perspectives rather than stages. They also wanted everyone to know the following disclaimers. 1. The study may not be exhausted, fixed, or universal. 2. The theory does not give additional insight into the unique and complex aspects of an individual's thought process. 3. Similar categories may be applied or even found in men's thinking. And 4. Other researchers and theorists might organize the observations made from the study in a different way or order. The authors of the study also strongly believe that for women, the development of voice and self are intrinsically intertwined. In this theory, the theorists found 5 perspectives which described how women know and view the world around them. These 5 perspectives are silence, received knowledge, subjective knowledge, procedural knowledge, and constructive knowledge. However, Clinchy later divulged that the authors of the study decided that they came to prefer knowing instead of the word knowledge. The first perspective in this theory is silence. According to the authors, silence is characterized by mildness, voicelessness, and obedience. Here, women find themselves subject to the sudden feelings or desires of external authority. While the authors found it rare that the subjects were currently in this perspective during the time of study, some of the women who were discovered through the social service agencies said that in retrospect, there was a feeling of being or needing to be silent. The authors said that the women who felt this way were among the youngest and most socially, economically, and educationally deprived of the women subjects. The second perspective is received knowing. This is characterized as a woman listening to the voices of others. It includes a lack of self-confidence and that one is only able to receive and reproduce knowledge that has been imparted on them with external authority. In higher education, This is more commonly seen with first-year students. The third perspective is subjective knowing. Here, one discovers that the truth is within, and this shift is particularly strong with women. Interestingly, according to the authors, a frequent cited contributing element was a failed male authority figure that triggered this perspective. An important part for this perspective is that for women, this is a quest for the self, and it can include an element of what can be described as walking away from the past. The fourth perspective, procedural knowing, is when a person learns and applies objective procedures, meaning that they are not influenced by emotion, to take in and communicate information and knowledge. There appears to be two ways in which this is evident. The first is referred to as separate knowing, and one would use impersonal procedures for establishing truth. The impersonal procedures can be characterized as critical thinking, listening to reason, and an adversarial tone. This approach often includes doubting. The second approach is connected knowing and is based in empathy and care. Basically, this means that instead of receiving information from an external authority, a person discovers truth through personal experience. The last perspective is constructed knowledge. This perspective involves a person combining subjective and objective knowledge while using thought and emotions. As the authors wrote, this step involves the process of sorting out the pieces of self and of searching for unique and authentic voice. Here, women discover the two basic insights of constructivist or practical thought, that all knowledge is constructed and the knower is an intimate part of what is known. Moreover, people in this perspective are often able to listen and converse with others without losing their own voice or thought. Since the publication of Blanke et al.'s theory in 1986, there has been a lot of additional research and application of the theory. In regards to research, Weinstock and Bond found that in their own study that there is a relationship between college women's perspectives and their conceptions of conflicts with close friends. Additionally, student-faculty interactions help support the importance of validation and a sense of being connected for women's intellectual and personal development. Another study found that collaborative learning has a strong and positive impact on college students and their development. Moreover, connective learning has a strong correlation when it comes to learning, where students embrace all of their responsibilities where it relates to successfully completing a course. This theory has a lot of relevance when it comes to teaching and to student affairs within higher education. Connected teaching is one way in which student affairs professionals can help women nurture their own voices and thoughts. It requires professionals to place a strong emphasis on connecting rather than separating, understanding and accepting rather than assessment, and collaborating with others rather than debating against them. Basically, connected teaching places a strong emphasis on connected learning, using first-hand experiences as a source of knowledge and for information, and it encourages students to initiate work patterns. Blanke et al. Also suggests that the role of the teacher should be looked at as a midwife, someone who helps and assists students in giving birth to their own ideas. To do this, a teaching midwife would encourage class discussions and diverse opinions. It also shows a strong sense of trust with students. Within student affairs, professionals should focus on having a genuine connection with students. This will help and encourage them to produce their own ideas regardless of being in class or not. This genuine connection allows students to connect, build, and nourish relationships that are both professional and personal. By supporting both separate and connected knowing, this allows students the best chance for intellectual development. The work of Blanke et al. Was very instrumental in the development of Asian American and Pacific Islander feminist learning. The next theory that we will dive into is the reflective judgment model by King and Kitchener. The reflective judgment model was created by King and Kitchener as a way to explain knowledge assumptions and how these affect the development of critical or reflective thinking skills in young adults with a focus on college students. The reflective judgment model describes stages of reasoning in young adults. Each stage describes changes in assumptions about knowledge and explains how assumptions are created and then applied as perspectives to solve problems. The theory was grounded in the work of many scholars, such as John Dewey, who was the first to define the term reflective thinking. The reflective judgment model can be broken down into 7 stages. Each stage is distinct from one another, but they are all related. In each of these stages, students use 3 criteria to reach conclusions. These criteria are certainty of knowledge, process of acquiring knowledge, and justification of knowledge. Although these criteria are in each stage, they are applied differently in each one. These stages are then grouped into 3 broader categories: pre-reflective reasoning, quasi-reflective reasoning, and reflective reasoning. In stage 1, individuals only have one set of beliefs, and they feel as though they do not have to justify what they believe in and why. In this stage, individuals also do not acknowledge any type of problems that do not have concrete answers. This type of reasoning is only found in very young children. In stage 2, individuals believe the truth is always accessible, even if it is not immediately known. They believe that all problems are solvable. They take the viewpoint that some people hold right beliefs while others hold wrong ones. In this stage, it is the knower's role to find the right answer. Individuals in this stage seek the answers from authority figures, as they are the ones to be seen to have all of the answers. Individuals in stage 3 believe that some truth is temporary, inaccessible, and that beliefs can be justified based on what is right in the moment. These students maintain the assumption that all problems have a solution, and this solution will be attained in the long run. In stage 4, students acknowledge the uncertainty of knowing. They come to the realization that knowledge cannot be validated externally. Individuals also begin to express skepticism of authority and identify that multiple people can hold knowledge and solutions. According to research, each stage 3 and 4 is where most college students are found, although it is possible for some that they will never move past stage 3. For stage 5, individuals believe that knowledge must be placed within the context that it was created. There is also an awareness that interpretation plays a role in how individuals perceive things. At this stage, students cannot compare merits of 2 alternative perspectives on the same problem. In stage 6, the certainty of knowledge is taken further because students understand that they must think of knowledge in the terms of the context it was created, not only examine it. They are also aware that knowing involves an evaluation of some evidence, and that some perspectives have to be weighed as better than others. This type of reasoning is usually found in graduate students or high-functioning undergraduate students. In stage 7, students realize that knowing is uncertain and is subject to interpretation of the individual. They also realize that one can make justifiable claims to better the problem under review. They understand that some perspectives or issues may be more warranted than others. They realize that one truth does not have to discount another truth. The reflective judgment theory highlights the linear progression of development of reasoning. It is believed that students must attain each step before moving on to the next. Although there are studies that say a student's level of education can determine how quickly one moves through each stage, it is important for educators to realize that students may have different assumptions and that these assumptions reflect the way a student makes meaning of knowledge, and it also reflects their worldview. It is important for educators to create space that allows students to be exposed to different points of view so that students can learn to develop reasoning skills and defend their own stances on issues. Lastly, the theory also highlights that reasoning skills and the reflective theory not only apply to academic learning, but also experiential-based learning as well. Students should be given opportunities to practice reasoning and thinking skills in real-life situations. This can be done in residence halls, practicums, co-ops, or even within peer groups. Now that you have an understanding of the different theories, it is important that we address some of the critiques against them. Critiquing theories allows us to better understand their limitations, how to apply them as student affairs professionals, and helps us to identify areas where more research is needed. Perry's theory has been used as the foundation for many of the more recent epistemological and intellectual theories and is still being used in research today. As the textbook explains, nearly all the existing psychological work on epistemological beliefs can be traced to Perry. Some of the assessment procedures developed by Perry are even still being used to gather new information. A more recent study that was conducted using these procedures found that differing patterns between Chicano and Anglo student ways of meaning. Perry's theory contributes to learning as intellectual and ethical development, learning as transformation, and learning as loss. These are all still used to help us understand how meaning is made both inside and outside of the classroom. Once expanded, researchers have found Perry's theory useful for understanding foundational cultural worldviews in higher education. Many researchers believe the theory can be used worldwide to determine if non-Western institutions follow the same path as Western institutions. As with any theory, Perry's theory comes with critiques and questions raised for future research. Some researchers have found that the theory may measure students' socialization into Western liberal education rather than students' actual growth. Some even go one step further and believe the theory is heavily influenced by the faculty's vision at individual institutions, and that it measures how students adapt into that vision. Limitations are also present due to the time period in which the theory was created. Those students are facing unique challenges that those in the 60s did not face. The foundations of this theory still ring true with students today. Additionally, some researchers raise a concern when it comes to Perry's inclusion of both the intellectual and ethical development construct, finding that the inclusion of both creates a perception of a more developed person, when in reality the subjects the theory was developed studying, undergraduate students, rarely demonstrate post-contextual relativistic thinking. As we have seen with many of the theories developed prior to the 21st century, Perry's theory was developed using white, traditional age males from prestigious institutions, meaning we should have some tentativeness when applying the theory to women, people of color, and other minoritized groups. Lastly, some have raised concerns over the practice of labeling students. But if the labels are used empathetically rather than judgmentally, the labels can help student affairs professionals more effectively contribute to the learning process by gaining additional insight on the student's intellectual development. Belenky et al., as well as Baxter-Magolda, outlined important gender-related differences in how students interpret their experiences. This came as part of the shift in research from mainly studying male students to beginning to examine institutions' now more diverse populations. Student affairs professionals can benefit from using the framework laid out in Women's Ways of Knowing, not only for women students, but for all students. The framework helps practitioners learn how to listen and thoughtfully respond to all students. The theory focused on women, but also addressed different social classes and other factors that are more significant today than they were when Perry's theory was developed in the 1960s. Though this theory has helped move us forward and gain a better understanding of populations that previously had little research conducted on them, this theory still has a few critiques. Some have pointed to the lack of detail in the discussion of the procedures used to conduct the study, as well as the lack of detail in overall presentation of the data. Additionally, since this was not a longitudinal study, some question if the perspectives found are hierarchical. These critiques remind us of the importance of detailed documentation throughout the research process. Detailed procedural and data notes help to ensure a study's validity and are used to help other researchers who are working in the same field. King and Kitchener identified the existence of a more complex thought process in response to ill-structured problems or problems that do not have a definite solution. They used reflective judgment interviews, a process which provided a way for researchers to assess reasoning processes and is still used today. Additionally, they expanded the student population base that cognitive development theory applies to and helped promote theory to practice connections, meaning they discussed the importance of applying the theory both inside and outside the classroom. It is important for student affairs professionals to not only apply these theories to students learning in the traditional classroom sense, but to also get a better understanding of the student as a whole so they can learn how to best assist them outside of their academics. This allows practitioners to have a better understanding of how they can challenge students who are in different stages of development. King and Kitchener's theory is not without critiques. Some have noted that more attention needs to be given to gender differences as well as race and ethnicity factors. This is a need in many areas of student development, but since this theory was created in the 90s, institutions had more diverse populations, but the theory doesn't detail differences based off of these unique populations. Additionally, cognitive development is examined separately from affective and interpersonal development, while many argue the two cannot be adequately studied separately, as they are intertwined. In the future, building off of these theories and studying unique populations would add a great deal to our knowledge of epistemological and intellectual development in student affairs. Lastly, we will end off with the principles of development. Let's start off with acknowledging what is development. Development is defined as increasingly complex and adaptive forms of seeing and knowing. They carry sheds of light on how to identify aims of educational programs designed to foster development. You will want to keep in mind that not everyone's development isn't the same. You have people coming from different cultures and backgrounds which can impact their development. There are 3 principles of the approach to moral and cognitive development. The first one is the interpretation of experiences. Everyone's experience is not the same, in which they interpret the same situation differently. This is really important when it comes to racial situations on campus. Students that are accustomed to a specific student population will not have the same experience in the same situation than someone who is not familiar with these students. Individuals actively construct and organize their interpretations of experiences. Next is the ways of students organizing their thinking. There are discernible age-related patterns for the ways individuals organize their thinking. For example, a 3-year-old may interpret bouncing a ball around as just fun, but a 25-year-old can interpret it as a serious game of basketball. Overall, it depends on the age of the brain. Lastly, it is the development that occurs in context in the interactions with one's environment, and this varies based on the individual. In conclusion, the idea of development is represented throughout many theories of college student development. Through King's article, it provided the insight we need to get a better understanding of moral and cognitive development through the lens of a student. The linkage between the two is that they both take from experiences and how you interpret them to better yourself. Moving forward, we should continue to seek the correlation between moral and cognitive development and see how this information can be used in other developmental domains. So now that we have covered the 3 cognitive developmental theories, I would like you to think about how these theories apply to the current generation of students and how they might impact your work, your campus, and your department. What themes or trends are you able to identify in the 3 cognitive development theories? Do you think one cognitive developmental model applies more to the current generation of students? How are college campuses impacted by cognitive development theories, and can you see their effects on your college campus or department? We are really looking forward to hearing your posts and discussions. Thank you very much for watching our presentation. We hope you learned a lot about epistemological and intellectual development in college students.